So, having designed a space like that, teachers observe the impact on the pupils. And they always see the same things: improved confidence, greater motivation, better collaboration, greater resilience, better discipline, improved attainment. That is their observation. And the result of that is they go, well, we'd like those things every day. And they then take the learning that they've got back into their other practice. So they say, the kind of space we did this project in had a set of characteristics which led to those outcomes. I want those outcomes, so I will take it back into my normal teaching practice. And it then becomes part of what they do every day. Why we call this high functioning, and I think this is the key part as we begin to think about museums and libraries, is that that set of characteristics means that pupils are physically engaged because it's very mobile, it uses their bodies a lot. They're socially engaged because they're working in groups and working together. They're emotionally engaged because their emotions are acknowledged. They're intellectually engaged. And when you're physically, socially, emotionally and intellectually engaged, you are at your most alive. That's what being alive is about. I have 4 children. Ben was only one of them. They're bigger now. But when they were little, they used to watch television. And watching television, in my view, is a low-functioning activity. It's not social, it's not really emotional, it's not really intellectual, it's certainly not physical. But I know from watching them, it was always their last choice to do that. What they really wanted to do was activities like that. They wanted to do activities which were physical, social, engaged them emotionally, and were intellectually challenging. That's how they wanted to spend their lives. And if you design lessons with using that analysis of the characteristics of the lesson to include all those, you get children at their most alive. They feel good, they feel confident, and because they are so alive, they perform really well. So it results in high performance, good test scores, good behaviour. And that's the theory that lies behind what we do. Now, what does all this mean then for museums and libraries? So my principle is that way of learning, engaging children simultaneously, physically, socially, emotionally and intellectually, should be at the heart of how you try and operate a museum or a library. Is this difficult to do? This is another quadrant, which is thinking more about museums in a way. A lot of museums in England now think about this quite a lot. And what you have in the bottom left-hand corner is old-fashioned museums. They've got lots of objects, very little explanation. You wander around, that's about it. A lot of museums worry about the fact that they've moved up to being museums with lots of information, but still a very transmissive communication style. So instead, they try and become highly interactive. So there's lots of museums in England you go to now where you can press lots of buttons and move things around and so forth. But actually, when that happens, a lot of the museums have lost their learning. There's buttons to push and things to do. Actually, you're not learning very much from having pushed the buttons. It's just more interactive. So the challenge is how to create a learning environment which is still exciting and interesting and interactive, but keeps the learning as deep. I think that if you look at this slide again, there's quite a lot of things which give museums and libraries advantages on the high functioning side. So both of them tend to be very authentic. They've got real things in them. In school, you're often using pretend things, but when you go to the museum, it's full of real things. That's it. The use of time is usually much more flexible in a museum. You decide how long you want to spend doing that. People visit museums in groups. You wander around museums. It's very mobile. So there's quite a lot of characteristics which already fit in this. But there are other aspects which I think can be developed. This slide was interesting. I was working, it's a bit hard to read. I was working with a group of 14-year-olds in Western Australia because they're building a huge new museum, and I was doing some research with these young people about what kind of museums they would really like. And the reason I put it up is it's really interesting that without any prompting from me, apart from being fun and interactive and the kind of thing that you'd expect them to say, they're putting up dangerous, risky, and so forth, spontaneously. That degree of danger that you feel there, I think, is something that they look for. So, these are some ideas about how we've gone around in the past engaging young people using this approach in museums and libraries. We did a project in a big library in Bristol, which is the main city in West England. We did it in the Central Library. And the museum wanted to engage more young people in coming to their library. And what we did is we got a group of young people from a primary school to come and spend a few days at the library, looking at what they thought was most interesting and developing a tour around the library for young people of the same age. So it was, what do young people think are interesting? And then they produced these sheets of paper which you could give to young people when they turned up. Said, go around the library this way. And it was very interesting what happened. Firstly, the children asked lots of questions about the history of the library. They were interested in it. And they discovered that there was a story that the library had a ghost called Grace. And what they did is that there was information about this ghost on the sheet of paper. But in the roots around the library, there was a place that you came out on a balcony and you looked down at all the shelves. And the top of the shelves, which are very high up, were quite dusty. And they just wrote with a finger on top of one of them, Grace. So that the kids, having known the story about the ghost, would then come out and would just see in the dust, Grace written there. And sort of feel, oh, the ghost is written. But one of the most interesting things is that as they explored the library, the bit of the library that the children liked most was the art library. It happened to be a library with a very good visual arts collection of books and visual arts. There were big books, little books, pictures and so forth. And the children really liked that. The bit they found least interesting was the children's library. But they were interested in these books. And they became really keen on this. And they developed for their guide various exercises for children to do, which would help them explore the different books. But during the time they were doing this, there were big budget problems in the municipality. And the municipality was cutting things. And the municipality decided they'd have to cut the art library. And the children were so outraged, they went to the elected councillors to a meeting to protest and to tell the councillors why the art library was so important and what it taught you. And the councillors were so impressed that they saved the art library. So the children who you teach in this way, engage in this way, can also become wonderful ambassadors for you. But I think that notion of getting young people to interpret your collections and your spaces and to become the mediums through which they open it up, I think you could extend this idea in every local museum to get one of the years from the local primary school each year to do a day at the museum, which they organised. They decided what the children saw, what was important. They did all the explanations and the performances and so on and so on. Because one, they will then work really hard at understanding the museum because they don't have to explain it. And two, they're really good communicators of it. And it doesn't cost any money. So that's the idea of getting them to present your museum or library. Learning to see. This is building on the authentic. Is that libraries and museums are full of interesting objects and authentic, real ones and so forth. And it's a really great opportunity to engage young people in actually seeing, feeling, touching. But one of the things that I feel strongly about is one of the best ways you engage with something you're studying is to try and draw it. And learning to draw something is really the best way to understand what you're looking at. And I use this example of a project we did in a primary school, which was just about self-portraits, in which there was a visual artist who was working with the children. And he came in on the first day and he said to all the children, right, I'm going to teach you to draw self-portraits. So everyone draw a picture of yourself. And one of the boys drew this. His name was Riley, and he was 6 years old. And as you can see, he's very proud of his teeth. Then the artist says, no, really stop and look at all the pictures, at all your faces. And they spent a couple of hours measuring faces, looking at faces, and so forth. And at the end of 2 hours, the artist said, okay, now you've really looked at faces, try and draw it again. This is 2 hours later. Riley has drawn himself, and you can begin to see the hairs there, ears appear, all sorts of things beginning to get there. The artist goes away, comes back the next week, this time brings a mirror for each table, puts the mirror on the table, and says, now look in the mirror and really draw yourself. And the children spent all morning doing it. And at the end of the morning, this is what Riley has drawn. Now, the important thing about this is he's not got better at drawing, he's got better at seeing. And I think using drawing to train people to see, and using that as a key way to interact with your collections and the objects that you have, is a great way of really engaging them interactively, but also getting them to really see what it is that you're showing them.